Imagine standing at the edge of an island so remote that the nearest continent is over 2,000 miles away, surrounded by silent giants of stone, carved and raised by human hands thousands of years ago. These are the world's most isolated megaliths monuments that defy logic and ignite curiosity. How did ancient peoples without modern tools or maps accomplish such staggering feats of engineering and navigation? What drove them to move multi-ton stones across treacherous oceans, through dense jungles and over rugged mountains, leaving behind markers of their presence in the most unforgiving corners of the earth? This is not just a story about stones. It is a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and an unyielding desire to explore the unknown. These megalithic wonders are more than archaeological curiosities. They are windows into prehistoric navigation systems that connected cultures, guided voyages, and mapped the heavens long before the invention of the compass or the written word. From the haunting Moai of Easter Island to the floating city of Nan Madol, each site holds clues about how our ancestors read the stars, harnessed the winds, and mastered the seas. In this video, we will journey to these far-flung locations, decode the techniques used to transport and erect these colossal structures, and unravel a mystery that links the past to our deepest human instincts, the need to explore, to create, and to leave a mark on the world. You are about to discover how prehistoric peoples achieved what seems impossible, and in doing so, you may just rethink everything you thought you knew about early seafaring, celestial guidance, and the boundless spirit of adventure that has defined us since the dawn of time. So what exactly are we talking about when we say megalith? At its most basic, the word simply means large stone, but it refers to something far more profound than a random boulder. These are structures crafted and arranged by human hands, monuments that required not just immense physical effort, but also sophisticated planning and a deep understanding of the world. Think of the iconic standing stones of Stonehenge, silently guarding the English countryside, or the massive dolmen stone tables scattered across the Korean peninsula. Consider the great platform mounds, or ahu, of Polynesia, which served as sacred foundations for towering statues. These diverse forms, found from the windswept coasts of Scotland to the lush highlands of Ethiopia, all share a family resemblance, a scale that dwarfs the individual, a deliberate placement within the landscape, and frequently, a precise orientation to the heavens above. This last point is perhaps the most telling. Many of these ancient sites are carefully aligned with celestial events. A specific stone might mark the exact spot on the horizon where the sun rises on the summer solstice, bathing the structure in light. Another might frame the rising of a particularly bright star or the extreme points of the moon cycle. This wasn't mere coincidence. It was astronomy in stone, a permanent calendar and observatory built to track the seasons, predict celestial movements, and likely to anchor rituals to the cosmic order. This shared feature across continents presents us with a fascinating puzzle. How do we explain the appearance of such similar concepts in cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of miles? Were there faint, now lost threads of connection, ancient sea routes that allowed ideas to diffuse from one group to another? Or does this point to something even more remarkable, the independent innovation of complex ideas, a testament to a universal human impulse to measure, mark, and understand our place in the universe using the most durable material available? This global distribution is the first clue that we are dealing with societies of unexpected capability and reach. Before we can even begin to unravel the how of their construction, the truly mind-boggling logistics of moving these multi-ton stones, we must first appreciate the where. The presence of these monuments on remote islands, in dense forests, and atop towering hills tells us that their builders possessed the confidence and the skill to operate across enormous and often hostile territories. They were not isolated communities huddled in one place. They were navigators, surveyors, and engineers who moved through their world with purpose. Understanding this widespread presence sets the stage for the true mystery. It forces us to ask not just how they built these wonders, but how they managed to transport the very essence of them, the colossal raw materials, across such challenging and varied terrains, a challenge we will soon see they met with breathtaking ingenuity. Now consider the profound challenge of isolation itself. The most remote megalithic sites are not just far from modern cities. They are separated by vast, empty expanses of ocean or harsh, unforgiving terrain that would have been incredibly difficult to traverse with prehistoric technology. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is a classic example, a tiny speck of land in the eastern Pacific, over 2,000 miles from the nearest inhabited shore. To reach it, ancient Polynesian voyagers would have had to undertake a journey across open water that would have taken weeks, guided only by the stars, the swells, and the flight patterns of birds. The very existence of the Moai on that island is a declaration of human determination. It proves that people not only found this remote place, but then chose to invest immense communal effort into shaping its landscape with monumental art. This wasn't a quick survival camp. It was a sustained, generations-long project of cultural expression in one of the most isolated places on Earth. This pattern repeats across the globe. On the Canary Islands, off the coast of northwest Africa, the Guanches people built mysterious stone pyramids and structures whose purpose we are still unraveling. In the jungles of Costa Rica, nearly perfect stone spheres were carefully placed in clearings and near riverways, far from the quarries where they were painstakingly shaped. What unites these sites is the undeniable message they send. The builders went to extraordinary lengths to make their mark in these specific, challenging locations. This immediately rules out simple, practical explanations. They weren't just building shelters or storage facilities. The motivation had to be powerful enough to justify the staggering investment of time, labor, and resources required to both get there and then build there. This is where these sites transform from mere curiosities into priceless time capsules. Their isolation acted as a preservative, while monuments in more populated, accessible areas were often dismantled for building materials, repurposed by later cultures, or simply worn down by centuries of human activity. These remote megaliths were largely left alone. They remained frozen in time, waiting for us to discover them in a state much closer to their original condition. This preservation offers archaeologists a cleaner, clearer window into the past. By studying the tools left behind, the remains of workshops, and the organization of the sites themselves, we can piece together the methods and the mindset of the people who created them without as much interference from later historical layers. Ultimately, the puzzle of their isolation forces us to reconsider the capabilities and ambitions of ancient societies. It pushes back against the outdated notion of prehistoric peoples as simple, primitive groups concerned only with day-to-day survival. The evidence written in stone across these remote landscapes tells a very different story, one of incredible resilience, profound spiritual or social ambition, and a surprisingly advanced knowledge of engineering and astronomy. These builders were not just surviving, they were conquering some of the most daunting environments on the planet to create something lasting, something meaningful, and something that would continue to speak across millennia. To truly grasp the scale of this achievement, picture the landscape of Rapa Nui itself. The Moai were not simply carved where they stand. They were meticulously quarried from the volcanic rock of a single crater, Ronoroku, and then transported miles across the island to ceremonial platforms called ahu dotting the coastline. The largest of these statues towers over 60 feet tall and weighs an estimated 82 tons. That is heavier than a fully loaded semi-truck, and they did this without metal tools, without wheels, and without the use of any draft animals. The island had none. The engineering problem this presents is staggering, a puzzle that has fascinated and perplexed explorers and archaeologists for centuries. How did they move them? The answer likely lies in a beautiful combination of physics and coordinated human effort. Oral traditions passed down through generations speak of the statues walking across the land. For a long time, this was dismissed as pure myth, but recent experimental archaeology has shown there might be a literal truth buried in the legend. By using sturdy ropes, teams of people could have rocked a moai from side to side, edging it forward with each oscillation in a motion that, from a distance, would indeed look like the stone giant was walking upright. Other methods, like sliding the statue on a sledge over lubricated log rollers, are also plausible. Each method would have required an immense, unified labor force, a testament to a highly organized society capable of mobilizing and feeding hundreds of workers for a single communal goal. Yet the story of the Moai begins long before they ever moved an inch. It starts with an even more daring feat, the settlement of the island itself. Rapa Nui is one of the most isolated pieces of inhabited land on the planet. The nearest continental landmass is South America, over 2,000 miles to the east. The nearest inhabited Polynesian islands are the Pitcairn Group, itself incredibly remote. To reach this tiny speck, the ancestral Polynesians undertook a voyage of unimaginable courage and skill. They would have sailed in large, double-hulled canoes capable of carrying families, plants, and animals. Their navigation was a masterclass in environmental observation. They read the subtle patterns of ocean swells, followed the migratory paths of birds, and memorized a celestial map of the stars, using their movements to hold a steady course across thousands of miles of open ocean. This deep connection to the sea and the sky is etched into the Moai themselves. The ahu platforms upon which they stand are not randomly placed. Many are positioned with precise astronomical alignments, oriented to point toward the rising or setting sun during the solstices, or to track important stars and constellations used in navigation, like the Pleiades cluster. Furthermore, the statues themselves are not gazing out to sea, as one might assume. Almost all of them face inland, watching over the villages and the people. This suggests their primary role was ancestral. They were massive representations of deified chiefs, their supernatural power, or mana, believed to protect and nurture the community. Their placement across the island also likely marked the territories of different clans, turning the entire landscape into a sacred, social, and celestial map. The Moai of Easter Island are therefore far more than mysterious stone faces. They are the ultimate symbol of a culture born from the ocean, a people who harnessed incredible maritime technology to find a new home, and then channeled their collective spirit into one of humanity's most audacious artistic and engineering projects. They represent the pinnacle of Polynesian exploration, a tangible link to the navigational genius that allowed humans to conquer the vast Pacific. Now, shift your gaze from the open Pacific to the lush, volcanic island of Pohnpei in Micronesia. Here, nestled within a mangrove-fringed lagoon, lies a site that seems to defy the very laws of physics and geography. Nan Madol. This is not a collection of simple stone structures. It is a full-fledged city, its name translating poetically to the spaces between, a reference to the intricate network of canals that weave between its 92 artificial islets. These islands were not formed from earth or sand, but were painstakingly constructed by hand, placed atop coral reefs using colossal building blocks. We are not talking about simple boulders. The foundation of this entire aquatic metropolis is built from an estimated 750,000 tons of naturally formed basalt logs, massive prismatic crystals of stone, some weighing 50 tons or more. To put that into perspective, that is the weight of a fully loaded city bus, and the builders of Nan Madol moved not one, but thousands of them across miles of open ocean. The first and most staggering question is where this stone came from. The basalt columns were quarried from the other side of Pohnpei, from sites like Soke's Ridge, and then transported to the construction site. This was not a simple overland haul. The most plausible theory, supported by both local oral history and archaeological evidence, is that these gigantic stones were moved by water. Imagine the scene: enormous outrigger sailing canoes or perhaps large rafts, carefully loaded with these multi-ton logs, being navigated through the unpredictable and often treacherous waters that surround Pohnpei. This required an intimate, generational knowledge of the ocean that is almost unimaginable today. The builders would have needed to understand the complex tidal flows that surge through the island's channels, to read the subtle changes in wave patterns that indicated submerged reefs, and to wait for precisely the right seasonal winds to fill their sails and provide power for their heavy-laden vessels. This was not a matter of brute force, it was a symphony of precise timing and environmental mastery. The construction itself speaks to a society of unparalleled organizational skill. We are not looking at a haphazard pile of rocks. The basalt logs were laid in alternating crisscross patterns, like log cabins made of stone, to create stable foundations that could withstand the constant assault of the tropical sea and typhoons. The largest structures, like the massive mortuary compound of Nandowas, feature walls nearly 25 feet high. The logistical coordination needed for this project is breathtaking. It implies a highly stratified society with a powerful ruling class, perhaps the Sordelor dynasty of legend, that could command a vast labor force for centuries. Workers would have included not just the stone movers and layers, but also canoe builders, sailors, fishermen to feed the populace, and coordinators who understood the intricate dance of supply and construction. This level of complexity firmly places Nan Madol in the realm of a maritime civilization. Its very existence is a monument to oceanic navigation. The builders were not land dwellers who occasionally ventured onto the water. They were people of the sea for whom the ocean was not a barrier but a highway. Their world was the vast expanse of Micronesia, and their canoes were their lifeline. It is entirely plausible that they utilized some form of early navigational chart, perhaps similar to the famous stick charts of the Marshall Islands, which used palm ribs and shells to map the complex interplay of ocean swells and currents around islands. Their knowledge was a living science passed down through chance and practical apprenticeship, allowing them to traverse hundreds of miles between islands with confidence. Nan Madol stands as a powerful counterargument to any notion of primitive isolation in the ancient Pacific. It is evidence of a sophisticated, interconnected world where ideas, people, and these unimaginably heavy building materials moved freely across the blue expanse. It was a ceremonial and political center of immense power, a Venice of the Pacific built not with concrete and steel, but with volcanic rock, human ingenuity, and a profound mastery of the ocean's secrets. This city of stone, rising from the lagoon, remains one of history's most eloquent testimonies to what ancient mariners could achieve. Leaving the vast oceans of the Pacific behind, we now journey to the windswept coast of Brittany in northwestern France, where an entirely different kind of megalithic wonder unfolds across the landscape. Here, the challenge was not crossing open water, but mastering the land itself. The Karnak alignments present a spectacle of a different order, not a collection of statues or a city on the sea, but a vast, seemingly endless army of standing stones. Over 3,000 individual menhirs, some standing over 4 meters tall, are arranged in long, parallel rows that stretch for nearly 4 miles across the countryside. This is not a random scattering. The stones are organized with a deliberate, almost regimented precision into 3 major groups, known as the Manek, Kamario, and Kaleskan alignments, creating a monumental complex that dates back to an astonishing 4,500 BC. This places its construction centuries before the Great Pyramid of Giza was even a concept. The sheer scale of the site immediately rules out any simple explanation. We are looking at a project that required a sustained, coordinated effort over generations. Unlike the Moai or the logs of Nan Madol, these stones were not transported across vast distances. The local granite was sourced from outcrops relatively nearby. The true feat was not in the quarrying, but in the planning, the precise positioning, and the sheer mobilization of labor to erect this forest of stone. This suggests a highly organized Neolithic society with a clear, powerful purpose driving them to reshape their entire environment in this specific, awe-inspiring way. So what was that purpose? While the remote island megaliths speak of oceanic mastery, Karnak hints at a sophisticated terrestrial navigation system. The prevailing theory is that these great stone rows served as a gigantic ceremonial pathway, a processional route for seasonal gatherings, pilgrimages, or rituals that connected different communities across the region. The alignments don't exist in isolation. They are part of a much wider sacred landscape that includes massive burial mounds, elaborate passage graves, and solitary standing stones, all linked by ancient trackways. Walking between these towering lines of stone would have been a profound experience, physically guiding people through the ritual space and perhaps symbolically marking a journey between the world of the living and the world of the ancestors. This function as a pathway is powerfully reinforced by the site's deep connection to astronomy. Many of the stone rows are precisely aligned to celestial events. The most striking alignment is with the sunrise on the summer and winter solstices. On these pivotal days of the year, the sun would rise directly over specific stones or at the end of certain rows, dramatically flooding the pathway with light. Other alignments may have tracked the more complex 18.6-year cycle of the moon, known as a lunar standstill. This wasn't just for ceremony, it was practical science etched into the earth. For a prehistoric agricultural society, knowing the exact timing of the solstices was crucial for planning planting and harvests. For traders and travelers, these predictable celestial events provided a fixed calendar and a reliable navigational aid. This is where Karnak reveals its genius as a landmark for land-based wayfinding. Imagine yourself as a Neolithic trader journeying through the dense forests and rolling hills of prehistoric Brittany. A solitary standing stone might mark a critical fork in a trail or a valuable water source, but Karnak was something else entirely. It was a destination, a regional hub, and an unmissable beacon. The sight of these countless stones standing in silent formation would have been visible from miles away, an unmistakable point of reference on the horizon. Its alignment with the solstice sun meant that if you knew the date, you could use the site to calibrate your direction of travel, using the stones as a giant compass rose to orient yourself for the next leg of your journey across the continent. The builders of Karnak, then, were master surveyors and astronomers of the land. They used simple tools, likely wooden stakes, ropes, and grommets, and an incredibly patient process of observation to plot these grand designs. They understood the cycles of the heavens and knew how to translate that knowledge into a permanent, physical calendar on the ground. Their achievement shows that the prehistoric impulse to navigate and mark the world was not limited to the open sea. It was a universal human endeavor adapted to the environment. In the Pacific, it meant reading waves and stars to conquer the ocean. In Brittany, it meant reading the sky to create a fixed, monumental map on the land, turning the very earth into a guide for ritual, trade, and community. Karnak stands as a breathtaking testament to this terrestrial mastery, a sprawling stone poem written in the language of the cosmos. From the regimented rows of Karnak, we now travel across the Atlantic to the steamy, vibrant jungles of southern Costa Rica, where an entirely different kind of megalithic mystery awaits. Here, scattered across the Diquis Delta, we find objects that seem almost otherworldly in their perfection, the stone spheres of Costa Rica. Unlike the towering menhirs or statues we've seen, these artifacts are remarkable not for their height but for their form. Hundreds of these spheres, known locally as Los Bolas, range in size from a few centimeters to over 2 meters in diameter, with the largest weighing an astonishing 16 tons. Their precision is what truly captivates the modern eye. Many are so perfectly spherical that they deviate by less than a centimeter, a feat of stoneworking that suggests a sophisticated understanding of geometry and meticulous, patient craftsmanship achieved using only stone tools and abrasives. The raw material itself presents the first great challenge. These spheres were painstakingly carved from gabbro, a hard, dense igneous rock similar to basalt, and from limestone. The gabbro spheres were not found lying conveniently in riverbeds. They were quarried from the foothills of the nearby Talamanca Mountains. This means the builders first had to identify suitable boulders, then laboriously shape them using hammerstones made of equally hard rock, pecking away at the surface and finally polishing them to an almost unnatural smoothness over what must have been generations of work. The sheer investment of time for a single large sphere is almost unimaginable, speaking to a culture that placed immense value on these objects. But the greater puzzle, even more than their creation, is their distribution. These massive stone balls were not left in the quarries. They were moved, often over considerable distances through dense, tangled rainforest, across uneven terrain, and up and down steep slopes to be placed in very specific locations. Archaeologists have found them arranged in lines, in triangles, and in parabolic patterns, often in the plazas and key areas of chiefdom settlements. Crucially, many of these settlement sites are located near the region's major rivers, the Taraba and the Sierpe, which served as the natural highways of the pre-Columbian world. This strategic placement is a major clue, strongly suggesting the spheres were deeply connected to trade, power, and social structure. This is where the purpose of the spheres becomes a fascinating debate. Their placement near important dwellings and in clear geometric patterns suggests they were powerful status symbols. A chief who could command the labor to create and position multiple large spheres was publicly demonstrating his wealth, his authority, and his connection to the supernatural. They may have served as territorial markers for powerful clans, or their alignments could have had astronomical significance, marking solstices or other celestial events important to an agricultural society. Some researchers propose they were visual representations of celestial bodies, creating a model of the cosmos on Earth to be used by shamans or leaders. Unlike the more straightforward monuments we've seen, the sphere's true meaning is multi-layered, blending the practical with the profoundly spiritual. Solving the logistical nightmare of moving these multi-ton granite balls through a roadless jungle reveals a different kind of ingenuity, one adapted to a very specific environment. The most likely theory involves a combination of clever engineering and a natural resource the Diquis Delta had in abundance: water. For overland transport, workers likely used a system of ropes, wooden levers, and log rollers. They could have constructed a sturdy wooden cradle for the sphere, which was then pulled by large teams of people over a path of constantly repositioned rolling logs. This method, while incredibly labor-intensive, is proven to work and has been demonstrated with replicas. However, the real innovation likely came with the use of riverine transport. The proximity of so many sphere sites to major rivers is almost certainly not a coincidence. It is highly plausible that for longer journeys, the builders shifted their strategy from fighting the jungle to using its waterways. They could have built large, stable rafts or barges from balsa wood, which is both buoyant and native to the region. A sphere could be carefully rolled onto such a craft and then floated down river with the current, requiring far less effort and manpower than an overland haul. This method would have allowed chiefs to transport these symbols of power across their territory, effectively turning the rivers into conduits for both trade and political influence. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, therefore, stand as a brilliant example of environmental adaptation. They show a society that did not simply struggle against its surroundings, but learned to read the landscape and harness its resources to achieve its most ambitious cultural and artistic goals. Now we travel even further back in time, to a hilltop in southeastern Turkey that is quietly revolutionizing our entire understanding of human prehistory. Göbekli Tepe is not just old, it is staggeringly ancient, dating back to approximately 9,600 BCE. To grasp the significance of that date, consider this. It was built a staggering 6,000 years before Stonehenge and a full 7 millennia before the Great Pyramid of Giza. This places its construction firmly in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when humanity was still thought to be living in small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers, concerned primarily with day-to-day survival. The very existence of Göbekli Tepe shatters that image completely. What awaits you at this site is unlike any other megalithic complex we have explored. There are no standing stones in rows or giant statues. Instead, you find a series of at least 20 circular enclosures carved directly into the bedrock of the hill. And within these circles stand massive T-shaped limestone pillars, each one weighing many tons. The largest of these pillars towers over 18 feet high. The engineering required to quarry, transport, and erect these monoliths is immense, but it is the artistry that truly astonishes. The pillars are not blank. They are covered in exquisite, low-relief carvings of a mesmerizing bestiary: foxes, boars, ducks, scorpions, lions, and vultures. This is not crude scratching. This is sophisticated, symbolic art on a grand scale, created by people we once considered primitive. The implications are profound. Göbekli Tepe forces us to rewrite the story of civilization. The standard narrative has always been that agriculture came first. The development of farming allowed for surplus food, which led to settled village life, which then eventually gave rise to religion, complex society, and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe turns this sequence on its head. Here we have a massive, undoubtedly religious ceremonial complex that was built before agriculture was widely practiced. This suggests that the human impulse to come together for shared belief, to create monumental art, and to organize large-scale labor projects may actually have been the catalyst that spurred the development of settled life and farming, not the result of it. While Göbekli Tepe is not isolated in the geographic sense like an oceanic island, its isolation is one of time. It stands alone in its era, a beacon of unexpected complexity. And this complexity extends to the skies above. Researchers studying the layout of the pillar enclosures have found compelling evidence that they were not randomly arranged. Some of the circles appear to have specific alignments with celestial events. Certain pillars might frame the rising point of specific stars, such as Sirius, or mark the solstices. One prominent theory suggests that the famous Vulture Stone, Pillar 43, with its detailed carvings of a scorpion, a vulture, and a bird carrying a round object, could be a sophisticated astronomical record, perhaps depicting a catastrophic event like a comet strike. This early celestial knowledge is the site's most tantalizing link to our broader theme of navigation. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe were carefully tracking the movements of stars and planets with such precision, they were cultivating a skill set that is the very foundation of wayfinding. While they may not have been navigating vast oceans at this point, they were undoubtedly navigating the cosmos. They were creating a fixed terrestrial map of the heavens, using these colossal pillars as their anchor points. This mastery of astronomy for ritual purposes contains the seed of the same knowledge that would later allow Polynesian voyagers to cross oceans and Karnak's builders to chart the land. It represents a shared, archaic understanding that the sky was a clock, a calendar, and a compass, a guide for both the spiritual and the physical journey. Göbekli Tepe is ultimately a humbling reminder of how much we have yet to learn about our deep past. It is a monument to a lost world of sophistication, a place where hunter-gatherers achieved architectural and artistic wonders we never thought them capable of. It suggests that the desire to understand our place in the universe, to mark it in stone, and to gather together in its name, is one of the most fundamental and ancient drivers of human culture. This hilltop sanctuary doesn't just challenge the timeline of history, it redefines the very essence of what it means to be human. Long before the invention of the magnetic compass or the sextant, humanity possessed a far more ancient and reliable guide, the night sky. For prehistoric peoples, the heavens were not a distant mystery but a dynamic, rotating map, a celestial clock, and an infallible calendar, all rolled into one. This profound astronomical knowledge was absolutely essential, and we find its most enduring proof etched in stone across the globe. The precise alignments of megalithic sites are not mere coincidences or simple ritualistic gestures. They are the permanent, physical evidence of a sophisticated scientific understanding that was critical for survival, migration, and the very coordination of complex society. Consider the practical challenge of navigation on the open ocean. When you are hundreds of miles from land, with no landmarks in sight, and only the endless expanse of water in every direction, the world becomes a featureless blue sphere. In such an environment, the only fixed points of reference are above you. The stars rise and set in predictable patterns. Specific constellations appear at certain times of the year. The sun's path across the sky shifts with the seasons. Ancient mariners learned to read these patterns with an accuracy that seems almost superhuman to us today. They didn't just know that the North Star, Polaris, remains relatively fixed in the northern sky. They knew how to use its height above the horizon to estimate their latitude. They recognized that the Great Bear constellation, Ursa Major, could act as a celestial clock, its rotation around Polaris helping to measure the passage of time during a long night voyage. This was not abstract knowledge. It was the difference between finding a new island home and vanishing forever into the emptiness of the Pacific. This deep connection is physically manifested in the stones themselves. On Easter Island, many of the great Ahu platforms are oriented so that their long axes point toward specific celestial events. Certain Ahu align with the rising of the Pleiades star cluster, known to the Rapa Nui as Matariki. In Polynesian culture across the Pacific, the heliacal rising of the Pleiades when they first become visible above the eastern horizon just before sunrise marked the beginning of the new year and was a crucial signal for navigation and agriculture. A voyager approaching Rapa Nui from the west would know that sighting these specific stars at a certain angle could confirm their course. The Moai, standing on these platforms, were not just ancestral guardians, they were the silent sentinels of a cosmic order, their backs to the sea and their faces turned toward the villages, framed by a sky their builders understood intimately. Similarly, on the other side of the world, the sprawling alignments at Karnak in France reveal a terrestrial application of this same celestial wisdom. While the long rows of menhirs certainly served as processional pathways for ritual gatherings, their orientation is far too precise to be random. Many of the stone rows are aligned to the rising sun on the summer and winter solstices. On these days, the sun would appear to slide directly down the length of the avenue, dramatically illuminating the entire corridor. This provided a perfect, unerring solar calendar for a society dependent on agriculture, signaling the time to plant, to harvest, and to prepare for the changing seasons. But the knowledge likely went even deeper. Some researchers propose that the more complex arrangements at Karnak, particularly the fan-like structures, were designed to track the more subtle 18.6-year cycle of the moon, known as a lunar standstill. This ability to predict the moon's most extreme positions in the sky would have been a phenomenal intellectual achievement, allowing for the planning of long-term events, trade missions, and ceremonies that required precise timing. This practical application of astronomy fundamentally reshapes our view of these ancient cultures. The ability to determine direction, time, and season was the cornerstone of everything. It allowed for the planning of long-distance voyages by predicting weather patterns and favorable winds. It enabled the coordination of large-scale construction projects, as a society needed to know when the agricultural season was over to free up labor for moving megaliths. It facilitated trade across vast distances, as travelers could use shared celestial knowledge to navigate and arrange meetings at specific times of the year. The sky was the ultimate shared resource, a universal library open to anyone who learned to read its language. The megaliths were the permanent library indexes, built into the landscape to preserve this vital information for countless generations, ensuring that the knowledge of how to navigate their world, both physically and temporally, would never be lost. While the stars provided a fixed map in the heavens, the ocean itself was a dynamic, living roadmap for ancient mariners, filled with subtle signs that could guide them to land over the horizon. Prehistoric navigators became master ecologists, learning to read the language of the sea, a language written in the constant flow of currents, the steady breath of the wind, and the behavior of wildlife. This was a science of observation, honed over countless generations and transformed into a reliable system for exploring the planet's vast blue wilderness. The most powerful forces on this aquatic highway were the great ocean currents, massive rivers within the sea that flow with relentless direction. In the Pacific, the prevailing currents act like giant conveyor belts, moving warm water from the equator toward the poles and cold water back again. A skilled navigator would know that catching the right current could carry a vessel effortlessly for hundreds of miles. The settlement of Easter Island is a classic case study. The most plausible route for its first Polynesian settlers did not involve fighting against the natural flow of the ocean but working with it. Setting out from the Marquesas or Mangava Islands, voyagers could have ridden the south equatorial current westward. This powerful current flows directly toward Rapa Nui, acting as a natural guide that would significantly reduce the physical effort needed for the voyage and increase the chances of stumbling upon that tiny, isolated island. It was less about battling the sea and more about understanding its rhythm and choosing to become a passenger on its predetermined paths. Equally important were the wind patterns, the great engines that powered these wooden vessels. In the tropics, the trade winds blow with remarkable consistency from the east, providing a predictable and powerful source of propulsion. Polynesian voyagers didn't just use these winds, they categorized them, knew their seasonal shifts, and understood how to sail across them or with them to reach a specific destination. They could sense a change in wind direction on their skin, observe how it affected the sail's pull, and adjust their course accordingly. This knowledge was so precise that it allowed for intentional exploration and return voyages. A navigator could sail west with the trade winds, knowing that at a different time of year, winds from another quadrant would be available to carry them back home again. This turned the ocean from a one-way trip into a navigable network of routes. Beyond currents and winds, ancient sailors learned to interpret the most subtle clues the environment offered. They observed the flight patterns of birds with a hunter's keen eye. A bird like the white tern, which flies out to sea to fish but must return to land each evening to roost, became a living compass. Spotting one of these birds in the afternoon meant that land was likely within a few dozen miles in the direction it was flying. The presence of certain types of cloud formations could also hint at land, as clouds often cluster or take on a greenish tint over islands or lagoons due to the heat and reflection rising from the land. Even the pattern of ocean swells, the long, rolling waves generated by distant weather systems became a navigational tool. A seasoned navigator could lie down in the bottom of the canoe and feel the vessel's motion, detecting the dominant swell direction and using it to maintain a steady course even on a starless night or during overcast days. This deep, empirical knowledge of the maritime environment did not vanish when they made landfall. It was literally set in stone. Many coastal megalithic sites are positioned in locations that make perfect sense from a mariner's perspective. They are often found on headlands, promontories, or small islets that are the first points of landfall when approaching from a specific direction, aligned with the very currents and winds that would have brought people there. These stones served as both a spiritual welcome and a practical navigational aid, a permanent, unmovable marker confirming a successful voyage and providing a fixed point of reference for future journeys. The knowledge of how to read these natural signs was too valuable to be left to chance. It was woven into chants, stories, and rituals, becoming a sacred tradition passed from master to apprentice, ensuring that the secrets of the sea would never be forgotten. Imagine a world without maps, without GPS, without a single written word to guide you. How would you remember the way across 1,000 miles of trackless ocean or through a vast, unfamiliar forest? For ancient peoples, the answer lay not on parchment, but in the human mind itself. They transformed their world into a living atlas, using a powerful combination of memory, story, and song to encode the most vital information for survival. This was the art of wayfinding long before the written word, a tradition where knowledge was carried in the rhythm of a chant and the melody of an epic tale. Oral traditions were far more than simple entertainment. They were sophisticated data storage systems, complex navigational instructions, the sequence of stars to follow, the feel of specific ocean swells, the flight paths of land-seeking birds were woven into the fabric of songs and stories. The very structure of these compositions was designed for memorization. Rhyme, rhythm, and repetition acted as cognitive anchors, allowing a navigator to recall vast amounts of precise information under the immense pressure of a storm or the disorientation of open water. A single chant might catalog the names and characteristics of dozens of islands in order, serving as a spoken checklist for a long voyage. These were not vague legends, they were technical manuals set to music, ensuring that critical knowledge was passed down, unchanged, from one master navigator to the next. This mental mapping found its physical counterpart in the landscape itself. Isolated megaliths were not just monuments, they were permanent pins in this vast mental cartography. A single standing stone on a remote headland could mark a safe landing point, a place where fresh water was found, or the starting point for a deep sea voyage. For a culture that relied on oral tradition, these stones served as unmovable mnemonic devices. A storyteller could reference the place of the tall stone or the bay of the three pillars, and every listener would instantly have a fixed geographical anchor for that part of the narrative. The stone verified the story, and the story gave meaning to the stone, creating an inseparable link between the oral tradition and the physical world. They were the hard drives of prehistoric navigation, storing waypoints in a durable, stone format for generations to access. We can see the breathtaking effectiveness of this system in cultures that have preserved these traditions into the modern era. The Maori of New Zealand speak of their great migration canoes guided across the Pacific by master navigators who used a vast body of knowledge called War Koro, the speaking house. These experts memorized star compasses, current patterns, and a long list of ancestral landmarks. Similarly, the Inuit peoples of the Arctic have intricate oral maps of the frozen north, with place names that describe ice conditions, animal migration routes, and safe passages through the pack ice, knowledge critical for survival in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The very survival of these cultures is a testament to the accuracy and reliability of orally transmitted navigation. This fusion of story and stone suggests that megaliths were likely part of a much larger, integrated system of wayfinding. A series of stones placed along a coast might not just mark a route, but might also align with a specific star mentioned in a navigational chant. As the voyager sailed, they could sing the song, sight the star, and check their position against the next expected stone marker. The megalith, the star, and the song all worked in concert to confirm the correct path. This turns the landscape into a kind of interactive map, where the physical and the oral constantly reinforce one another. It reveals a world where knowledge was not separate from the environment but deeply embedded within it, a continuous dialogue between people, their stories, and the very stones they placed to remember their way home. The sheer physical challenge of moving these colossal stones is almost beyond modern comprehension, forcing us to reimagine the very definition of engineering without blueprints, without metal, and without powered machinery. What we discover is not a story of magical solutions, but one of breathtakingly clever physics, profound material knowledge, and the raw power of coordinated human effort. The techniques varied wildly across the globe, perfectly adapted to the local environment, proving that these builders were not just laborers but brilliant practical scientists who understood the world around them in intimate detail. On land, the most universal principle was the reduction of friction. The simplest and most effective method, demonstrated in countless experiments, involves the use of log rollers and a sledge. A massive stone would be carefully levered onto a wooden sled or platform. Teams of workers would then lay a track of logs in front of the sled, and as it was pulled forward by ropes, the logs at the back would be constantly picked up and moved to the front, creating a continuous rolling pathway. This method transforms the nightmarish task of dragging a multi-ton block into a manageable, albeit still immense, undertaking. The key was understanding the right kind of wood, something strong enough not to splinter, but with a grain that allowed it to roll smoothly. To make it even easier, they likely lubricated the path with water or clay, turning it into a slick surface that drastically reduced the pulling force required. But some cultures developed even more specialized and astonishing methods. The oral histories of Rapa Nui speak of the Moai walking across the island. For centuries, this was dismissed as pure myth. However, archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo decided to test this legend experimentally. They fashioned a sturdy rope from natural fibers, tied it around the head of a concrete replica Moai and had two teams pull on either side, rocking the statue back and forth. With each subtle rocking motion, the team was able to walk the multi-ton statue forward in a series of small, controlled hops. It was a revelation. The legend was not a fanciful story. It was a precise, technical description of the method passed down through generations. This technique would have been particularly effective on the island's rugged, uneven terrain where a straight path of log rollers might have been impossible to maintain. For the final act of raising a standing stone or positioning a lintel, the most common solution was the earth ramp. To erect a massive menhir, a deep hole would be dug first. The stone would then be dragged to the edge of the hole and pivoted so one end was hanging over it. Using a system of levers and ropes, the builders would slowly raise the stone, all while simultaneously backfilling the hole with dirt and rocks to support its growing angle. This created a stable, growing ramp that provided purchase for the workers until the stone slid into its final, vertical position. For placing a heavy capstone on top, like those seen on dolmens, a large earthen mound would be built around the standing supports. The capstone would then be dragged up this artificial hill and carefully slid into place. Once the structure was complete, the entire mound would be painstakingly removed, leaving the free-standing stone table behind, a dramatic reveal of engineering prowess. The challenge of water transport, however, required a completely different kind of ingenuity. For moving stones along rivers or across calm coastal waters, the most plausible solution was the raft. Large, buoyant logs like balsa wood, which is native to Central America, would be lashed together to create a stable platform. A stone sphere or a smaller megalith could be rolled onto this platform and then floated to its destination with the current or by being towed by canoes. For the massive basalt logs of Nan Madol, this would have been essential. The builders likely waited for specific tidal conditions, using the incoming tide to help float their laden rafts over the reef and into the lagoon, and then precisely timing their work with the outgoing tide to settle the stones into their intended positions. This intimate dance with natural forces, using water not as a barrier but as a tool, showcases a level of environmental mastery we are only beginning to fully appreciate. These techniques, from rocking statues to tidal engineering, reveal that our ancestors possessed a formidable and sophisticated toolkit of knowledge, proving that true innovation has never been solely defined by the technology available, but by the limitless creativity of the human mind applied to the resources at hand. This brings us to one of the most captivating debates in archaeology. Were these far-flung megalithic cultures talking to each other, or were they simply arriving at the same brilliant ideas completely independently? It's a question that strikes at the heart of how we view our ancient ancestors, as interconnected explorers or as isolated geniuses. On one side of the argument, you have the diffusionists. They point to the undeniable stylistic similarities between megalithic structures found oceans apart. Take, for instance, the dolmen. This classic table-like structure of a large flat stone resting on two or more uprights appears with striking regularity from the coasts of Portugal and Ireland, all the way across to the Korean peninsula and parts of India. Could this really be a case of universal coincidence? Proponents of this view argue for ancient, now lost sea routes that acted as highways for ideas. They imagine bold mariners, perhaps traders or explorers, carrying not just goods but the very concepts of their architecture with them. A sailor from the Mediterranean might share a story about the great stone tombs of his homeland with a curious listener in India, and that seed of an idea over generations could take root and blossom into a local tradition. This theory suggests a prehistoric world that was far more connected than we might assume, with knowledge slowly diffusing along coastlines and trade networks over thousands of years. Yet the opposing view, known as independent innovation or parallel development, offers a powerful and equally compelling counterargument. This perspective suggests that humanity, when faced with similar fundamental needs and challenges, often arrives at remarkably similar solutions. The basic human needs that drove megalith construction were universal. Nearly every culture needed to track the seasons for agriculture, and what better way than to build a permanent, unmovable stone calendar aligned with the sun? Societies everywhere sought to honor their dead and mark their territory in a way that would last for eternity, and what material is more permanent than stone? The very nature of working with massive stones also dictates a certain limited set of logical solutions. If you want to lift a giant capstone, building an earthen ramp is simply the most obvious and effective method, whether you're in Wales or West Africa. The psychological impulse to create something monumental, to leave a lasting mark on the world that shouts "we were here," is a deeply human trait that could have emerged spontaneously in different cultures without any contact whatsoever. The existence of profoundly isolated sites like Easter Island throws a fascinating wrench into the heart of this debate. If the Polynesian settlers of Rapa Nui were completely cut off from the rest of the world for centuries, how could they have been influenced by outside ideas? Their Moai and Ahu platforms evolved in a unique vacuum, yet they share that core megalithic principle of using massive stone for astronomical and social purposes. This isolation strongly suggests that independent innovation is not just possible but probable. However, it gets more complex when we look at slightly less isolated places. The great city of Nan Madol in Micronesia, for instance, feels like it must have been part of a network. The sheer scale of its construction and the logistics of transporting basalt logs across water imply a culture that was in contact with other island groups, sharing and refining maritime and engineering technologies. Perhaps the answer isn't a binary choice between complete isolation and constant contact, but a spectrum. Maybe some core ideas, like the reverence for stone and the heavens, are innate human inclinations, while specific styles and advanced techniques could indeed spread through rare but transformative periods of long-distance contact. This nuanced view allows for both the incredible creativity of individual societies and the possibility of a faint, ancient web of connection across the globe, pushing us to appreciate both the shared humanity and the unique brilliance of every culture that ever dared to raise a stone to the sky. What could possibly compel a community to pour generations of labor into moving mountains of stone to the most inaccessible corners of the world? The sheer impracticality of it all forces us to look beyond simple survival and into the very heart of the human psyche. These were not random acts of construction. They were profound statements of identity, belief, and purpose, driven by motivations so powerful they justified what we would consider an impossible investment of energy and resources. At the core of this drive was almost certainly a deep and pervasive religious belief. For many of these cultures, the world was alive with spirits, ancestors, and gods who needed to be honored, appeased, or harnessed. The megalith itself often acted as a conduit between the earthly realm and the divine. On Easter Island, the Moai were not just statues. They were the physical embodiment of deified ancestors, their supernatural power, or mana, believed to watch over and protect the living community. Their immense size and imposing presence made that spiritual connection tangible and permanent. Similarly, the great tombs and dolmens found across Europe were more than just burial chambers. They were portals to the afterlife, houses for the spirits of the departed who remained active participants in the world of the living. By building these structures in prominent or ritually significant places, often aligned with celestial events, communities were literally building their cosmology into the landscape, making their beliefs an unshakable part of their reality. This spiritual endeavor was inextricably linked to social cohesion. The very act of building something so monumental required an entire society to work in concert. From the master architects who understood astronomy and engineering to the hundreds of laborers who pulled the ropes and quarried the stone, everyone had a role to play. This created a powerful shared purpose, forging a collective identity around a common goal. The successful erection of a massive stone would have been a cause for immense communal pride, a testament to what the group could achieve together. This wasn't just about creating a monument, it was about creating a society. The project itself reinforced social hierarchies, established leadership, and distributed resources, all while strengthening the bonds that held the community together against the challenges of an often unpredictable world. In the most practical sense, these remote megaliths also served as powerful territorial markers. In a world without fences or written deeds, a multi-ton stone block sent an unmistakable message: we are here. This land is ours. This was especially critical for island societies or groups living in resource-scarce environments. A line of standing stones could delineate a sacred burial ground from a hunting area, or mark the boundaries between the territories of different clans. For seafaring people, a distinctive stone platform on a headland could serve as a navigational aid while simultaneously announcing to any approaching canoe exactly whose shore they were approaching. The investment required to place these markers demonstrated a group's commitment to that specific piece of land. It was a declaration of permanence and strength that would deter potential rivals and solidify a claim for generations to come. Underlying all of these reasons is perhaps the most fundamental human drive of all, the desire to leave a mark, to scream into the void of time that we existed. This is about commemoration and legacy. The megaliths are the ultimate symbols of this impulse, crafted from the most durable material our ancestors could find. They were built to outlast wood, outlast memory, outlast the very people who built them. They were a conversation with the future, a desperate and beautiful attempt to ensure that their names, their chiefs, their gods, or simply their presence would not be forgotten. This transcends culture and era. It is the same impulse that leads us to carve our initials on a tree or build skyscrapers that pierce the clouds. It is a universal human trait to fight against our own impermanence, and the builders of these isolated wonders chose to do so with the most ambitious canvases they could conceive. Ultimately, these structures represent a breathtaking demonstration of mastery over nature. By moving the largest objects their world offered and arranging them according to their will, these communities were asserting their place in the universe. They were taking a chaotic, untamed landscape and imposing a human order upon it. They were aligning their lives with the predictable cycles of the cosmos, while simultaneously conquering the unpredictable challenges of their immediate environment. This was not an act of defiance, but one of harmony, a statement that they understood the rules of the natural world well enough to work within them to create something enduringly magnificent. The psychological drive, then, was a complex tapestry woven from threads of faith, community, territory, memory, and a deep-seated need to connect, to mean something in a vast and often indifferent world. Now, let's consider the landscape itself as a living record of human movement. These isolated megaliths were not placed randomly. They often stand like permanent signposts along the very routes our ancestors traveled as they explored and populated the world. Think of them as the prehistoric equivalent of highway markers or lighthouses, designed to be seen from a distance and recognized by those who knew their meaning. Their strategic placement reveals a sophisticated understanding of geography and a need to communicate across both space and time, creating a durable network of guidance that operated for centuries. Take, for example, the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. For the Polynesian voyagers who settled islands from Hawaii to New Zealand, the stone platforms known as ahu were far more than just religious sites. They were critical navigational infrastructure. An ahu built on a headland or a prominent coastal point served as an unmistakable landmark for approaching canoes. Its distinctive shape and orientation would signal a safe landing site, a place where fresh water could be found, or a rich fishing ground. The arrangement of these platforms could even indicate direction. A navigator memorizing the sequence of islands in a chart would have their mental map confirmed by the physical presence of these stones, each one a confirmed waypoint on a vast oceanic highway. This system transformed the intimidating void of the Pacific into a connected series of known points, making the incredible feat of Polynesian migration not just possible but repeatable. On the continents, the story shifts from sea markers to land guides. Across the forests and plains of Europe, solitary menhirs and arranged stone rows often trace the paths of ancient trade routes, migratory trails for herds, or pilgrimage pathways. A traveler moving through the dense woodlands of prehistoric Brittany would have found immense reassurance in the sight of a familiar standing stone at a crossroads or on a hilltop. It confirmed they were on the right path, warned of difficult terrain ahead, or marked the boundary of a friendly territory. In a world without maps, these stones were the map. Their alignment often mirrors the natural pathways of least resistance following river valleys, skirting mountain ranges, and connecting fertile valleys, effectively codifying the collective knowledge of generations of travelers into a permanent stone guidebook. By meticulously mapping the distribution and alignment of these megaliths, archaeologists can now reverse engineer these ancient routes. A line of stones leading inland from a beach may trace the path from a landing site to a seasonal camp. A cluster of monuments in a high mountain pass might mark a critical rest stop on a transhumance route used for moving livestock. The very type of stone used can sometimes tell a story of movement, as geological analysis can trace them back to quarries sometimes hundreds of miles away, proving that people were not just moving themselves but were capable of transporting ideas and materials across astonishing distances. This distribution paints a picture of a dynamic, interactive prehistoric world, far from the static image of isolated tribes. It was a world of explorers, traders, and pilgrims, connected by pathways marked in stone. This perspective fundamentally changes how we view these monuments. They are not just ritual centers frozen in time. They are active participants in the story of human migration. They represent the moment a group of people had moved beyond mere survival in a new land and had begun to imprint their identity upon it, to organize it, and to make it navigable for others who would follow. Each stone placed was a declaration of familiarity with the landscape, a claim of understanding, and an invitation or a warning to others. They are the fingerprints of exploration, the durable signatures left behind by the relentless human drive to move, to settle, and to connect. To truly grasp the genius of prehistoric navigation, we need to look beyond the silent stones and into a living tradition, one that has not only survived but has been brilliantly revived. This is the story of Polynesian wayfinding, a holistic art that represents the pinnacle of human environmental awareness. Unlike modern navigation, which relies on instruments and external data, wayfinding is a complete immersion into the natural world. The navigator, or PWO, becomes a single integrated sensor, continuously processing a symphony of cues from the stars above, the waves below, the winds on the skin, and the behavior of wildlife. This knowledge wasn't just practical, it was sacred, a deeply spiritual discipline passed down through chants, stories, and rigorous apprenticeship, forming the very backbone of the greatest migration in human history. The system itself is a breathtakingly complex science of observation. At night, the navigator uses a star compass, not as a physical object, but as a mental map dividing the horizon into 32 houses. Each house is anchored by a specific star or constellation that rises and sets at a fixed point. As one star leaves its house, another enters, providing a constant rotating celestial guide. But the sky is not always clear. During the day or under cloud cover, the navigator reads the ocean itself. Every island creates a unique refraction pattern in the swells, a subtle signature that a trained navigator can feel through the motion of the canoe. The direction and quality of the wind, the presence of certain cloud formations that cluster over land, and the flight paths of birds like the Hōkūleʻa white tern, which flies out to sea to fish but must return to land at night, all become pieces of an infinite and ever-changing puzzle. This vast body of knowledge required physical anchors on land, and this is where the megaliths re-enter our story. The stone platforms known as Maritime and specific navigational markers served as open-air classrooms and laboratories. A stone alignment on a beach might be positioned to frame the rising point of the Pleiades Matariki or the Southern Cross, crucial stars for setting a course. Apprentices would spend countless hours at these sites, memorizing the star paths under the guidance of a master, their learning cemented by the unchanging stone reference points. These structures transformed abstract celestial knowledge into a tangible, communal practice, ensuring that the critical information for survival and exploration was woven into the very fabric of the culture's relationship with its landscape. For a time, this incredible knowledge was perilously close to being lost, a casualty of colonial expansion and the adoption of modern technology. The very idea that ancient peoples could intentionally sail across thousands of miles of open ocean was dismissed by Western scholars as mere accident. This dismissive theory was utterly shattered by a revolutionary project, the building and voyage of the Hōkūleʻa, a double-hulled Polynesian voyaging canoe. In 1976, using no modern instruments whatsoever, relying solely on the rediscovered techniques of wayfinding under the guidance of master navigator Moai from the Micronesian island of Satawal, the Hōkūleʻa successfully sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti. This voyage was a seismic event. It was a powerful act of cultural resurrection that proved the intentionality and sophistication of Polynesian migration beyond any doubt. The legacy of the Hōkūleʻa is immense. It sparked a cultural renaissance across Polynesia, revitalizing language, canoe building, and immense pride in ancestral accomplishment. It also provides us with the most compelling window we have into how prehistoric peoples elsewhere might have operated. The use of stone markers as teaching tools for celestial alignment, the intricate oral chants that serve as living databases of navigational data, the profound understanding of oceanography, all of this gives us a vibrant, working model to interpret the silent megalithic sites of other cultures. The Polynesian example shows us that these stones were likely not isolated monuments but part of an integrated system, where ritual, memory, and empirical observation were fused into a single, powerful tool for conquering the greatest challenges on Earth. This living tradition doesn't just tell us about the past, it offers a timeless lesson in human ingenuity and our deep, enduring connection to the natural world. Across the British Isles, the landscape itself seems to whisper ancient secrets, dotted with stone circles and towering monoliths that have captivated the human imagination for millennia. While sites like Stonehenge in England are globally famous, they are far from alone. They are part of a vast and intricate network of megalithic monuments that reveal a society deeply attuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. These structures are not random arrangements of rock. They are precise astronomical instruments engineered in stone, representing a sophisticated fusion of celestial observation, communal ritual, and practical necessity that stands as a testament to the intellectual prowess of Neolithic Britain. The grandeur of Stonehenge is undeniable, but its true genius lies in its alignments. The entire monument is oriented around the solstices, those pivotal moments in the yearly solar cycle. At dawn on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the rising sun aligns perfectly with the heel stone, its rays shooting through the heart of the circle to illuminate the altar stone at its center. Conversely, at sunset on the winter solstice, the shortest day, the sun sets directly between the uprights of the tallest trilithons, framing the event in a dramatic display of stone and light. This was not a casual observation. It was a meticulously planned and executed feat of engineering that required generations of precise solar tracking. For an agricultural society, this knowledge was power. Predicting the solstices with stone-cold certainty meant knowing precisely when to plant crops, when to harvest, and when to prepare for the harsh winter months. It was a colossal, communal calendar that ensured survival. Yet the astronomical ambition of these builders extended far beyond the sun. The more complex and subtle cycles of the moon were also within their purview. At sites like Callanish on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland, a breathtaking cross-shaped arrangement of standing stones reaches out across the peat bog. The central monolith, a towering 5-meter-tall gneiss pillar, is the focal point for a celestial dance that occurs only once every 18.6 years. This is the lunar standstill, the point where the moon reaches its most extreme northerly and southerly rising and setting positions on the horizon. The stones at Callanish appear to frame these extreme moonrises and moonsets, their dark silhouettes creating a natural observatory for tracking this long-term cycle. This represents a staggering depth of knowledge, an understanding of a pattern that unfolds over a time span longer than a single human generation. It suggests a continuous, carefully preserved tradition of observation, where knowledge was faithfully passed down through oral histories and practical teaching. This leads us to the compelling and enduring mystery of their construction methods. How did a people with only stone, wood, and bone tools achieve such precision? The bluestones of Stonehenge, for instance, were transported over an astonishing 140 miles from the Preseli Hills in Wales. The larger sarsen stones, weighing up to 30 tons, were dragged another 20 miles from the Marlborough Downs. The logistics are mind-boggling. It involved thousands of people coordinating over decades, using a system of sledges, log rollers, and rope made from plant fibers. The final stage of erecting the lintels, the horizontal stones atop the vertical ones, likely involved building massive earthen ramps and using a complex system of levers and counterweights to hoist them into place. This was not brute force. It was physics mastered through experience and ingenuity. The entire endeavor speaks of a highly organized society with powerful leaders, or a compelling shared belief that could mobilize and sustain such a monumental effort. Ultimately, to label these sites as merely calendars or observatories is to miss their profound cultural significance. They were undoubtedly places of immense ceremony, pilgrimage, and spiritual power. The effort invested in their construction signifies that they were central to the community's very identity and worldview. The cyclical events they marked, the return of the sun after the winter solstice, the extreme dance of the moon, were not just agricultural signals. They were sacred moments reaffirming the cosmic order and humanity's place within it. Gatherings at these stones for solstice celebrations would have reinforced social bonds, allowed for the exchange of goods and ideas between distant groups, and provided a direct, awe-inspiring connection to the divine forces of nature. The stones themselves, enduring and unmoving, became anchors in a changing world, symbols of permanence linking the realm of the ancestors with the lives of the living and the cycles of the cosmos above. While we often marvel at the sheer ambition of these stone structures, we must also consider the practical realities of the world in which they were built. The placement of megaliths was never a random act of whimsy. It was a deeply strategic decision, intimately tied to the environment and the relentless forces of climate. These ancient builders were not just astronomers and engineers. They were expert ecologists reading the landscape with a precision we are only beginning to appreciate. They chose locations not solely for their spiritual potency, but for their access to critical resources, their defensive potential, and their visibility within a living, breathing ecosystem that was both their provider and their challenger. Consider the constant dynamic relationship between land and sea. For coastal and island cultures, the shoreline was a highway, a pantry, and a sacred boundary all at once. It is no coincidence that so many megaliths are found in these liminal spaces. The great Ahu platforms of Polynesia, for instance, are frequently positioned on headlands or along beaches that were once prime fishing grounds. The stones themselves acted as territorial markers for these rich marine resources, signaling ownership of a productive lagoon or a deep water channel teeming with fish. Furthermore, a prominent stone structure on a coastline served as an unmistakable navigational beacon for returning voyagers, its silhouette against the sky providing the first sign of home after a long journey across the open ocean. However, this intimate connection with the coast also means that many sites have been lost to time. Rising sea levels since the last ice age have undoubtedly submerged countless megaliths, leaving us with an incomplete picture of how extensive these coastal networks truly were. What we see today may only be a fraction of what once existed, a haunting reminder of a changing world. Inland, the logic of placement shifts from the sea to the earth itself. In arid and semi-arid regions, the single most precious resource was, and always will be, water. It should come as no surprise, then, to find clusters of standing stones or burial mounds positioned near permanent springs, along seasonal riverbeds, or at the heads of fertile valleys. In the vast, dry landscapes of the Sahara, for example, prehistoric peoples erected stone monuments that scholars believe functioned as both territorial markers and as ceremonial centers for groups whose survival depended on controlling access to scarce water holes. The megaliths were a declaration of presence and priority in a challenging environment. Similarly, the placement of the Great Stone Rose at Karnak in France may be linked to the control and management of water sources for both practical agricultural use and ritual purification ceremonies, intertwining survival with spirituality. The very materials used in construction also speak to a deep environmental intelligence. Transporting multi-ton stones over long distances was a Herculean effort, so builders logically sought to minimize the challenge. This often meant sourcing materials as locally as possible. The Moai of Easter Island were quarried from a single volcanic crater, Ronoroku. The builders of Callanish in Scotland used the local Lewisian gneiss that littered their landscape. However, there are fascinating exceptions that prove the rule. The blue stones of Stonehenge were transported over 140 miles from Wales, a decision that must have held profound cultural or spiritual significance that outweighed the immense physical cost. This choice tells us that sometimes the symbolic properties of a specific type of stone, its color, its origin, its perceived power, could trump pure environmental practicality, revealing a complex interplay between material necessity and deeply held belief. Ultimately, viewing megaliths through an ecological lens transforms them from isolated puzzles into integrated components of their environment. They were not impositions on the landscape, but expressions of it. They represent a sophisticated understanding of local geology, hydrology, and seasonal patterns. A stone circle might mark a place where the sun's rays struck a hilltop on the winter solstice, bringing the promise of the sun's return and the next planting season. A lone men here might signify a reliable freshwater spring in an otherwise dry region. By studying these contexts, we see a dynamic dialogue between people and their world. These structures are the enduring legacy of cultures that did not simply live in their environments. They learned from them, adapted to them, and skillfully shaped them to meet their physical needs and their spiritual aspirations, leaving behind a permanent record of their resilience and ingenuity written in the language of stone. But beyond their roles as calendars, compasses, and territorial markers, these ancient stones held a deeper, more intimate power. They were a language in themselves, a silent form of communication that conveyed complex ideas about identity, belief, and social order across vast stretches of time. To understand these megaliths only for their practical function is to miss half of their story. They were also profound symbolic statements, carved from the very bedrock of the human experience. Their shapes, their placements, and the intricate art upon them were all part of a rich symbolic vocabulary, a way for these cultures to speak to their gods, their ancestors, and to future generations long after their own voices had fallen silent. Consider the powerful, inward gaze of the Easter island Moai. While they undoubtedly served as navigational markers for approaching canoes, their primary symbolic function was familial and spiritual. These were not impersonal monuments, they were revered ancestors, deified chiefs whose supernatural essence or mana was believed to be captured within the stone. By facing inland, they turned their backs on the vast, unknowable ocean and focused their protective power on the living community, the villages, the gardens, and the people. Their placement around the island's perimeter created a symbolic barrier, a ring of ancestral guardians watching over the clan territories within. The addition of a pukau, a separate red stone cylinder representing a topknot of hair on the head of a moai, was the final crowning act that completed its sacred status. This was not mere decoration. It was a powerful social statement about lineage, authority, and the enduring connection between the living and the dead. This symbolic language of power and ancestry is echoed in the great tomb structures of Europe, like the magnificent passage graves of Newgrange in Ireland or Michaud in Scotland. These were not just places to inter the dead, they were designed as dramatic portals to the otherworld. The long, narrow passageways, often aligned with the winter solstice sunrise, were built to channel a single, breathtaking beam of light deep into the central chamber once a year. This event, which still occurs with perfect precision today, would have been a powerful symbolic reaffirmation of life triumphing over death, of the sun's rebirth and the eternal cycle of the seasons. The spirals, circles, and zigzags carved into the stones within are not random graffiti. Many researchers believe they represent trance visions, cosmic maps, or spiritual journeys, encoding a complex cosmology into the very walls of the tomb. These structures were places of pilgrimage, ritual, and profound spiritual experience, communicating a sophisticated belief system about the afterlife to all who entered. Even the simplest of megalithic forms, the solitary standing stone or menhir, could carry a heavy symbolic load. In many cultures, a single, prominent stone erected on a hilltop or at a crossroads was a universal symbol of presence and claim. It could mark a burial site, a treaty agreement between clans, or the boundary of a territory. Its very permanence was the message, "We are here and we will remain." In some traditions, these stones were believed to be petrified ancestors or gods, serving as a fixed point of contact with the divine. Their phallic shape was often associated with masculine power and fertility, a symbol of strength and generative force planted firmly in the earth to ensure the prosperity of the people and the land. This fusion of the practical and the symbolic reveals the true genius of these monuments. A stone row at Karnak was both a solstice calendar and a processional path for rituals honoring the gods of the sky. A navigational marker on a Pacific shore was both a beacon for sailors and a shrine to the ocean spirit. The stone spheres of Costa Rica likely denoted both a chief's political authority and his connection to the celestial bodies they may have represented. They were multifunctional in the deepest sense, weaving together the threads of survival, society, and spirituality into a single, enduring tapestry. They communicated on multiple levels simultaneously, a guide for the body, a comfort for the soul, and a declaration of identity to the world. They were, in essence, the first books, written not in ink, but in earth and sky and stone, telling the stories of who these people were, what they believed, and how they understood their place in the vast, mysterious universe. When we look at these colossal stone structures, it's natural to focus on the staggering weight and scale, but the true magic lies in the subtle details of their creation. The chisel marks, the worn pathways, the strategic placement of lever points. The toolkit of a prehistoric engineer was astonishingly simple by modern standards. Stone hammers, wooden levers, fiber ropes made from twisted vines or bark, and perhaps some rounded cobbles to act as rollers. There were no metal chisels, no pulleys, no wheels in the conventional sense, and certainly no powered machinery. This wasn't a limitation that stifled ambition. It was a constraint that sparked a revolution in practical physics and collaborative problem solving. Every step, from quarrying a multi-ton block to raising it upright, was a masterclass in applied mechanics, a testament to a deep, intuitive understanding of forces, friction, and leverage that was learned through observation and perfected through generations of trial and error. Consider the seemingly impossible task of moving an 80-ton Moai or a 50-ton basalt log. The solution, demonstrated through modern experimental archaeology, is beautifully straightforward in principle: reduce friction. The most universally effective method appears to have been a combination of a wooden sledge and log rollers. A massive stone would be carefully levered onto a sturdy sled crafted from tree trunks. Teams of workers would then lay a path of logs in front of this sled. As teams pulled with heavy ropes, the sled would inch forward, and the logs from the back would be constantly carried to the front, creating a continuous rolling roadway. This method transforms an impossible drag into a manageable, albeit still immense, push. The real innovation was in the details, lubricating the track with water or clay to reduce friction even further, using wooden pegs and levers to make micro-adjustments in direction, and organizing a rhythm of pulling and rolling that could be sustained for miles. This wasn't brute force, it was coordinated, intelligent force. For the final, heart-stopping act of raising a standing stone, the most common solution was the earth ramp. To erect a massive menhir, a deep hole was dug first. The stone, already on its sledge, would be dragged to the edge of this hole and pivoted so one end was hanging over the emptiness. Using a system of levers from behind and ropes from the front, the crew would slowly and painfully raise the stone, degree by agonizing degree. The critical innovation happened simultaneously. As the stone rose, other workers would frantically backfill the hole with dirt, rocks, and rubble, creating a growing support ramp underneath it. This ramp prevented the stone from sliding back and provided a stable foundation for the workers to exert more leverage until, finally, the monolith slid into its vertical position. The excess earth would then be excavated, leaving the stone standing proudly on its own. This technique, requiring impeccable timing and communication, shows a breathtaking grasp of counterweights and pivot points. The challenge of water transport required a completely different kind of ingenuity, one that leveraged the environment itself. For moving stones along rivers or across calm coastal waters, the most plausible solution was the raft. Large, buoyant logs like balsa wood in the Americas or cedar in other regions would be lashed together with strong plant fiber ropes to create a stable, floating platform. A stone sphere or a smaller megalith could be rolled onto this platform using the same lever and roller technique, and then the raft would be floated to its destination, either by paddling, by being towed with canoes, or simply by riding the current. For the builders of Nan Madol, this knowledge was taken a step further. They likely used the tides themselves as a natural crane. By timing their work with the incoming high tide, they could float their log rafts laden with basalt columns over the shallow reef and into the lagoon. As the tide receded, the raft would settle gently onto the precise spot where the stone was to be placed, allowing workers to unload it at their leisure. This is a profound example of working with natural forces rather than against them, turning the ocean from an obstacle into the most powerful tool in their arsenal. These innovations reveal a fundamental truth about human progress. Necessity is not just the mother of invention, it is the mother of cooperation. The sheer scale of these projects demanded more than just clever physics. It required a social revolution. Moving a single large stone would have required the coordinated effort of dozens, if not hundreds, of people. This implies a society capable of organizing labor on a massive scale, of feeding and housing work crews, and of maintaining a shared vision across generations. The techniques themselves, the rhythmic pulling of ropes, the synchronized lifting with levers, required a level of communication and trust that would have strengthened social bonds and reinforced communal identity. The successful erection of a megalith wasn't just a technical achievement. It was a powerful social ritual, a tangible demonstration of what a community could accomplish when it unified behind a common goal. The stones, therefore, stand as monuments to both engineering genius and the enduring power of human collaboration, proving that the most sophisticated technology our ancestors possessed was not made of stone or wood, but of shared purpose and collective will. When we envision the great megalithic building projects of the past, our minds often conjure images of muscular crews of men straining against ropes and levers. This traditional picture, however, is almost certainly incomplete. To focus solely on the physical act of moving stone is to miss the vast web of organization, knowledge, and support that made these endeavors possible, a web in which women were undoubtedly central threads. The story of the megaliths is not just a story of brute strength. It is a story of community, and to tell it accurately, we must broaden our perspective to include the essential, yet often invisible, contributions of women. Archaeology provides us with some of the most compelling, though subtle, clues. The discovery of burials is particularly telling. In several Neolithic tombs across Europe, female burials have been found accompanied not by traditional jewelry or pottery, but by finely crafted stone tools. These weren't simple hammers. Some were specialized, high-status items like finely polished stone axes or adzes, objects that imply a role in planning, craftsmanship, or even leadership in construction projects. A woman buried with such tools was likely not a mere bystander but an active participant whose skills were valued and recognized by her community. This evidence challenges the simplistic assumption that labor was divided along strictly gendered lines, suggesting instead that roles may have been based on aptitude, lineage, or social standing rather than solely on physical strength. Beyond the tangible evidence of graves, we must consider the intellectual and spiritual domains. which were often deeply intertwined in prehistoric societies. The precise astronomical alignments of sites like Stonehenge or the Karnak alignments required generations of meticulous observation. Who was tracking the cycles of the moon, noting the subtle shift of the sun's rising point on the horizon, or memorizing the complex 18.6-year lunar standstill cycle? This knowledge, critical for determining the timing of construction and the orientation of stones, was likely held and passed down by specialists. There is no reason to assume these keepers of celestial knowledge were exclusively men. In many cultures, women have been the traditional custodians of lunar lore and calendrical systems, their lives and rhythms intimately connected to cyclical time. A woman who understood the stars could have been the chief architect determining where a mighty menhir should be placed. This leads us directly to the realm of ritual and ceremony. The erection of a megalith was far more than an engineering project. It was a profound spiritual act, a moment where the community connected with its ancestors and the cosmos. Oral traditions from various cultures frequently cast women in central roles as priestesses, oracle givers, and mediators with the spirit world. It is highly plausible that during the raising of a great stone, a woman of high status could have been the one chanting the sacred songs, performing the necessary offerings, and interpreting omens to ensure the project's success and the community's future prosperity. Her role would have been as vital as that of the crew pulling the ropes, providing the spiritual sanction and cosmological meaning that transformed a block of stone into a sacred monument. We can also look to living traditions for powerful analogies. In Polynesian culture, which gives us our best model for understanding oceanic megalith building, gender roles were often more fluid than Western stereotypes suggest. While men often captained the great voyaging canoes, women were frequently navigators, holding the sacred knowledge of the stars, currents, and wave patterns in their memory. They were the living libraries of wayfinding information. Furthermore, women often held immense economic and social power as managers of critical resources. On Easter Island, for instance, the presence of the Moai was believed to generate mana, or spiritual power, which in turn ensured agricultural fertility and the well-being of the people. It is thought that women may have been the primary managers of the gardens and food resources that sustained the massive crews carving and transporting the statues. Their work in organizing the food supply, distributing tools, and managing the community's economy was the invisible foundation upon which the visible achievement of the Moai depended. Recognizing the likely multifaceted roles of women does not diminish the accomplishments of megalithic societies. It profoundly enriches them. It moves the narrative away from a simplistic tale of male muscle and toward a far more compelling story of collective endeavor. It was a collaboration that drew on every available skill: the brute force of the pullers, the technical knowledge of the engineers, the celestial wisdom of the astronomers, the spiritual authority of the ritual leaders, and the logistical genius of the resource managers. To see the megaliths only as feats of strength is to see only half of the picture. When we include women in that picture, we see a fuller, richer, and more human story, a story of an entire community, men and women together, pooling their diverse talents to literally move mountains and reach for the heavens, leaving behind a legacy written in stone that speaks to the power of shared purpose. Imagine for a moment a world where all of humanity's knowledge, every map, every instruction manual, every scientific textbook exists only in the memories of its people. In such a world, how do you ensure that the most vital information, the kind that means the difference between finding a new homeland and vanishing forever into the sea, is not lost? The answer lies not in dusty archives, but in the captivating power of story. Across the globe, the most isolated cultures wrapped their essential navigational and engineering knowledge in the vibrant cloak of myth and legend, transforming dry technical data into unforgettable narratives that could be carried in the heart and sung across generations. These stories were far more than simple folklore. They were the living, breathing libraries of the ancient world, designed to preserve the very secrets of survival. Consider the beautiful and now proven legend of the Easter island Moai. For centuries, outsiders heard the oral tradition that the massive statues had walked across the island to their final positions. To Western ears, this sounded like pure fantasy, a charming fable about animated stone giants. It was dismissed as myth, but what if the word walked wasn't meant to be taken literally, but was instead a precise technical term, a mnemonic device encoding a complex engineering technique? This is exactly what researchers discovered when they put the legend to the test. By replicating the method described using teams pulling ropes to rock a statue from side to side, edging it forward with each oscillation, they found it was not only possible but highly effective on the island's rugged terrain. The story wasn't a fairy tale, it was a carefully crafted instructional manual, a way of ensuring that the crucial knowledge of how to move multi-ton stones without wheels or animals would never be forgotten, even if the actual practice was abandoned for centuries. The myth preserved the method. This pattern of encoding practical knowledge into narrative repeats itself across the vast expanse of the Pacific. The Polynesian voyagers who settled thousands of islands across an ocean larger than all the Earth's landmasses combined did so with the help of epic tales. Their stories of great heroes like Moai, who fished up islands from the deep ocean with his magical hook, are not just adventures. Scholars suggest they contain layered meanings. Moai's fishhook could be a metaphor for a specific constellation or star path used in navigation. His great catch a poetic description of the first sighting of a new island after a long voyage. The rhythms of the chants, the fixed structure of the verses, and the vivid imagery all served as cognitive anchors, making complex sequences of sailing directions easier to memorize and recall perfectly during the stressful and disorienting experience of a long ocean crossing. A single hero's journey could effectively be a sung map of the Pacific. These navigational myths often feature animal guides, and these too are rarely arbitrary. A widespread legend across many island cultures tells of a great voyager who was guided to land by following a specific bird, like a tern or a frigate bird, known to fly out to sea to fish but always return to land to roost at night. This isn't just a convenient plot device, it is the preservation of a critical environmental wayfinding technique. The story packages an essential rule. If you see this type of bird flying in a certain direction at a certain time of day, follow it, and it will lead you to safety. By turning this rule into a memorable story about a helpful animal spirit, the knowledge becomes unforgettable, passed down from grandparent to child as easily as a bedtime story, yet carrying within it a life-saving truth. Beyond technique, these stories also serve to preserve something equally important: the very spirit of exploration and the courage required for it. Tales of gods calming storms or ancestors summoning favorable winds were not just appeals to the divine, they were psychological tools. They reinforced the idea that such voyages were possible, that the gods favored the brave, and that the community's identity was rooted in this seafaring legacy. For a young person about to embark on their first long-distance voyage, hearing the epic tale of their ancestors' journey under the guidance of a star-shaped god would be a powerful source of confidence and resolve. The legend provided a roadmap not just for the seas, but for the human heart, building the cultural resilience needed to undertake such perilous journeys. By learning to read these myths not as mere stories but as encrypted repositories of knowledge, we unlock a lost window into the prehistoric mind. We begin to see that a tale about a giant placing stones might be a cultural memory of a massive communal effort, preserving the social organization required for megalith construction. A legend about a god who stole fire from the stars could be a metaphorical description of learning to use celestial bodies for navigation. These narratives were the most robust data storage system ever invented, one that couldn't be burned, waterlogged, or lost. It could only be forgotten if the people themselves died out. As long as the stories were told and retold, the knowledge lived, allowing each new generation to access the collective wisdom of their ancestors and continue the incredible journey of exploration and creation that defined their world. For centuries, the true scale and complexity of the megalithic world remained shrouded in mystery, hidden beneath dense jungle canopies, layers of sediment, and the waters of time. Our understanding was limited to what we could see on the surface, often just a fraction of the original design. But today, a quiet revolution is unfolding in archaeology, powered by a suite of dazzling new technologies that are acting like X-ray vision into the past, allowing us to see these ancient sites as their builders intended and to read the stories etched into the very bones of the stones themselves. We are no longer just scratching the surface. We are peeling back the earth itself to reveal a lost world of astonishing sophistication. One of the most transformative tools in this new arsenal is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine being able to digitally strip away an entire rainforest with the click of a button. That is essentially what LiDAR does. Mounted on an aircraft or drone, it fires millions of laser pulses toward the ground. These pulses penetrate small gaps in the vegetation canopy but bounce back solidly off the ground surface and any stone structures hidden below. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to return, an incredibly detailed three-dimensional map of the bare earth is created, utterly devoid of trees and undergrowth. The results have been nothing short of breathtaking. In places like the jungles of Guatemala, LiDAR surveys of the Maya heartland have revealed sprawling megalithic networks that dwarf previous estimates, uncovering thousands of previously unknown structures, from hidden pyramids and grand plazas to extensive systems of raised causeways and fortifications. This technology is showing us that what we once thought were isolated ceremonial centers were, in fact, vast, interconnected urban landscapes, completely rewriting our perception of the scale and population of these ancient civilizations. It allows archaeologists to see the full context of a site, how ceremonial avenues connected with residential areas and defensive walls, providing a holistic view of prehistoric urban planning that was simply impossible before. While LiDAR reveals the macro scale, other scientific techniques are allowing us to perform a kind of geological forensics on individual stones, tracing them back to their precise points of origin. This is where isotopic analysis comes in. Every rock on Earth has a unique geochemical fingerprint, a specific ratio of elements and isotopes that is determined by the conditions under which it formed. By taking a tiny sample from a megalith and comparing its isotopic signature to known geological sources, scientists can now pinpoint the exact quarry it came from, sometimes hundreds of miles away. This has settled long-standing debates and revealed staggering truths about prehistoric logistics. We now know, for instance, that the famous bluestones of Stonehenge were indeed hauled all the way from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a distance of over 140 miles. But even more astonishingly, isotopic analysis of megaliths across Europe is beginning to reveal patterns that suggest certain types of rock were chosen not just for their practicality, but for their spiritual or symbolic significance. A stone from a particular sacred mountain might have been considered more powerful, justifying the immense effort required to transport it across continents. This isn't just about tracing routes, it's about understanding the minds of the builders and the profound meaning they attached to the very materials they used. Beneath the waves, another frontier of discovery is opening up through the field of underwater archaeology. For millennia, rising sea levels since the last ice age have submerged countless coastlines that were once dry land, hiding what were likely crucial hubs of prehistoric activity. Using advanced sonar mapping, sub-bottom profilers, and scuba teams, archaeologists are now beginning to find these lost landscapes. Off the coast of Sicily, researchers have discovered a massive monolith, carved and with a man-made hole drilled through it, resting under 230 feet of water on a submerged landmass that was an island above sea level 9,000 years ago. This find suggests that complex stoneworking and maritime activity were happening in the Mediterranean far earlier than previously believed. Similarly, the search for similar submerged sites around known megalithic areas, like the coast of Brittany near Karnak, promises to reveal lost harbors, ceremonial sites, or quarries that could completely change our understanding of how these cultures used their coastal environments. Perhaps the most intimate new window into the past comes from the realm of genetics. DNA analysis allows us to move beyond the stones and meet the people who moved them. By extracting ancient DNA from human remains found in and around megalithic tombs, scientists can now trace family relationships, map migration patterns, and even uncover the genetic origins of these builders. The results are profoundly reshaping the narrative. Analysis of remains from Neolithic tombs in Ireland and Sweden has revealed that the people buried inside a single tomb were often close biological relatives, suggesting that these monuments were used by specific kin groups over many generations. This turns them from impersonal communal projects into powerful symbols of specific family dynasties. Furthermore, genetic studies are tracing the spread of megalithic building practices across Europe, not necessarily as a single culture spreading, but as a powerful idea that was adopted and adapted by different, sometimes genetically distinct, populations who were in contact with one another. We are moving from seeing megaliths as the product of a mysterious, anonymous megalithic culture to understanding them as the creations of real, interconnected families and communities with their own unique histories and lineages. Each of these technological breakthroughs, LiDAR, isotopic analysis, underwater exploration, and DNA sequencing, acts like a new lens on a complex camera, each bringing a different part of the picture into sharp focus. Together, they are converging to form a radically new and infinitely more detailed image of prehistory. They are proving that the prehistoric world was far more dynamic, interconnected, and intelligent than we ever gave it credit for. The megaliths are no longer silent, solitary mysteries. They are becoming lively archives, each new scan, each isotopic test, each genetic sequence adding another chapter to their story, revealing them as the central nodes in a vast and sophisticated network of human ingenuity, exploration, and belief. Could the great stone circles of Europe, the towering Moai of the Pacific, and the mysterious spheres of Central America be the scattered fragments of a single, global conversation? This is the bold and controversial proposition put forward by a growing number of researchers, the theory of prehistoric global connectivity. It's an idea that challenges one of the most fundamental principles of traditional archaeology, that of independent innovation, and instead paints a picture of an ancient world humming with long-distance exchange, where ideas sailed across oceans long before empires ever rose. This isn't to suggest a single, unified, megalithic empire, but rather a vast and informal network of maritime routes, a kind of ancient internet where the most valuable commodity wasn't goods but knowledge itself. The evidence for this startling idea is woven from several compelling, if still debated, threads. The first is the haunting similarity in architectural styles separated by staggering distances. Consider the dolmen, a simple yet specific structure of a large capstone balanced on upright stones. This form appears with remarkable consistency from the coasts of Portugal and Ireland, across the Mediterranean, and all the way to the Korean peninsula and parts of India. Could this really be a case of universal coincidence, of dozens of cultures independently arriving at the exact same architectural solution for a tomb or shrine? Proponents of connectivity argue it is far more likely that the concept diffused, carried by ancient mariners who moved along coastlines and between islands, sharing the blueprint of a dolmen just as easily as they might trade a shell necklace or a piece of obsidian. It's the architectural equivalent of a meme going viral across continents. Even more concrete evidence is emerging from the field of archaeogenetics. Scientists can now analyze ancient DNA from skeletal remains found in megalithic tombs, and the results are revealing unexpected family ties. Studies of individuals buried in Neolithic tombs in Ireland, for example, show close biological kinship, suggesting these were lineage-based monuments. But on a broader scale, genetic markers are beginning to trace population movements that align tantalizingly with the spread of megalithic practices. We see traces of ancient DNA journeying from Anatolia into Europe, and other studies reveal a surprising genetic link between ancient populations in North America and Polynesians, suggesting a pre-Columbian trans-Pacific contact. This doesn't just imply the exchange of ideas, it shows the movement of people. These weren't isolated cultures, they were meeting, mingling, and likely sharing their most profound cultural innovations, including how and why to build with massive stones. Perhaps the most persuasive argument for a shared, global wisdom is written in the sky. The precise astronomical alignments found at megalithic sites across the world are simply too consistent to be easily dismissed. The solstices and equinoxes were clearly of paramount importance, from the sun's rays piercing the heart of Stonehenge to the Moai of Easter Island, standing watch over ceremonies timed with the rising of the Pleiades. This shared celestial focus suggests a common underlying purpose, a universal human desire to track time, predict seasons, and anchor ritual to the cosmic cycle. But it also implies a shared methodology. The knowledge required to accurately calculate these alignments is complex and would have taken generations to develop through observation alone. The theory of connectivity offers an alternative, that this sophisticated astronomical understanding was a prized piece of knowledge that spread along trade routes, a kind of intellectual cargo that was as valuable as any tangible good. A master builder from one region could have traveled with traders, sharing the secrets of aligning a stone with the winter sunrise, with that knowledge then being adapted and localized hundreds of miles away. Of course, this theory of a connected ancient world is far from settled science. The opposition, championing independent innovation, offers a powerful counter-argument. They point to the basic principles of physics and human need. If you want to lift a heavy capstone, building an earthen ramp is simply the most logical method, whether you're in Wales or West Africa. The need to honor ancestors, mark territory with permanent materials, and create calendars are universal human impulses that could logically lead to similar solutions in completely isolated cultures. The isolated development of pyramids in both Egypt and Mesoamerica is often cited as a prime example of this phenomenon, known as parallel development. The critics rightly ask, without any concrete evidence of the ships capable of such long-distance voyages, or goods from one region found in another, isn't it a leap to assume connection? This is where the megaliths themselves become the silent witnesses. As the most durable artifacts of prehistory, they may hold the final clues. the ongoing work of geologists using isotopic analysis to trace stones to their exact quarries is already proving that prehistoric people moved stones over much greater distances than previously believed. If we were to find, for instance, a stone in a European dolmen that originated in a North African quarry, or vice versa, it would provide the smoking gun for this ancient network. The megaliths are the fixed points on the map, the permanent signposts that may one day allow us to chart the forgotten sea routes of our ancestors. They challenge us to expand our imagination of the past, to consider a world where the oceans were not barriers but highways, and where the human drive to explore and connect may be far older and far more accomplished than we ever dreamed. These monumental achievements scattered across the globe force us to undertake a profound shift in perspective, to fundamentally rewrite the story of our collective past. For too long, the narrative of prehistory has been one of gradual, linear progress, a slow crawl from primitive hunter-gatherer to settled farmer, with complex society and technology arriving only at the very end of the story. The evidence written in stone, from the 9,000-year-old pillars of Göbekli Tepe to the ocean-conquering voyages that settled Rapa Nui, shatters this simplistic timeline. It reveals a different truth altogether, that the human drive to explore, to create, and to understand is not a product of civilization, but its very cause. These were not simple people merely reacting to their environment. They were bold pioneers actively shaping their world with a sophistication we are only beginning to grasp. This re-evaluation pushes back powerfully against the condescending notion of primitive societies. There was nothing primitive about the engineering genius required to walk an 80-ton Moai across miles of rugged terrain using nothing but ropes and coordinated human effort. There was nothing rudimentary about the astronomical knowledge encoded at Karnak, tracking the moon's complex 18.6-year cycle with nothing but patient observation and precisely placed granite. These were intellectual and scientific triumphs of the highest order. They demonstrate that our ancestors possessed a deep, empirical understanding of physics, astronomy, and ecology that rivaled, and in some ways perhaps even surpassed, our own in its holistic integration with the natural world. They were not waiting to be enlightened by future technologies. They were using the tools and minds they had to solve problems on a staggering scale. At the heart of this reimagined history lies a crucial insight. Navigation was never just a means of survival. It was the ultimate expression of human curiosity and the primary engine of cultural connection. The settlement of the remote islands of the Pacific was not a desperate flight from overcrowding or resource scarcity. It was a deliberate, intentional act of exploration, driven by a powerful desire to see what lay beyond the horizon. Each successful voyage, marked by the erection of a new stone platform or statue, was a testament to this insatiable curiosity. Furthermore, these navigational feats created a web of connection across vast distances. The shared astronomical knowledge, the similar styles of stoneworking, and the genetic evidence of contact all suggest that the prehistoric world was far from a collection of isolated tribes. It was a network linked by brave mariners who carried not only goods but ideas, beliefs, and technologies, weaving together a tapestry of human experience across oceans and continents. This new perspective carries a vital lesson for us today. Living in an age of satellites and digital maps, it teaches a profound respect for knowledge that is not written down but lived and felt. The Polynesian master navigator who can feel the subtle shift of an ocean swell through the hull of his canoe, or the Inuit elder who can read the safety of ice by its color and texture, possess a science that is deeply attuned to the world. This embodied knowledge, passed down through chants, stories, and apprenticeships, represents a different way of knowing, one that is holistic, sustainable, and intimately connected to the environment. In an era of climate change and ecological crisis, we have perhaps never needed to recover this way of thinking more urgently. The megaliths stand as permanent reminders that our deepest understanding comes not from dominating nature, but from learning to listen to it. Ultimately, these silent stone sentinels are monuments to the most enduring and universal human quest, the search for our place in the cosmos. By aligning their structures with the solstice sun or the rising of the Pleiades, these ancient cultures were doing more than creating calendars. They were anchoring their lives, their rituals, and their very existence to the grand, predictable cycles of the universe. They were asserting that they belonged to something vast and meaningful. In an age where we are often disconnected from the natural world and the night sky, the megaliths call us back to that fundamental wonder. They challenge us to look up, to consider the stars not as distant points of light, but as the same guides that directed ancient voyages, and to see in these colossal stones not just the mystery of the past, but a mirror reflecting our own endless capacity for wonder, exploration, and connection. The world's most isolated megaliths are far more than mysterious monuments scattered across forgotten landscapes. They are profound and enduring windows into the minds of the prehistoric navigators who placed them there. These silent stone sentinels stand as permanent testimony to a forgotten age of exploration, built by peoples who mastered the seas, the stars, and the very stones beneath their feet, using nothing but acute observation, breathtaking innovation, and an unbreakable collective will. They achieved what we, even with our modern technology, would find daunting, crossing thousands of miles of trackless ocean, moving mountains of rock, and encoding a sophisticated understanding of the cosmos into their very architecture, all without the benefit of written language or powered tools. From the haunting Moai of Easter Island, gazing inland over the people they were built to protect, to the floating city of Nan Madol, a testament to oceanic mastery built upon countless basalt logs, these sites speak a universal language of human ambition. They tell us that the drive to explore the unknown, to create something magnificent, and to connect with others across vast and empty spaces is not a modern invention but a fundamental part of who we are. It is a legacy carved in stone, a shared impulse that echoes from the deepest past into our present moment, reminding us that curiosity and courage are the true engines of human progress. As new technologies like LiDAR and genetic analysis continue to peel back the layers of time, we are only just beginning to uncover the full depth of their secrets. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, not only solving historical mysteries but allowing us to honor the legacy of those incredibly resourceful and resilient people who came before us. They were not primitive, they were pioneers, and their story is ultimately our story, a chronicle of ingenuity, perseverance, and the timeless desire to find our place in the universe. If this journey across oceans and millennia has captivated your imagination, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And for more adventures into history's greatest enigmas, be sure to subscribe and join us as we continue exploring the wonders of our